So real briefly, a little bit about myself. You can review these bullets. Gives you a little bit of background. I started here at the firm in 1997, and for a good 15 years of that time, I traveled quite frequently to U.S. embassies and consulates in Mexico, Canada, and throughout the world, and assisted many applicants with their visa applications. I've been able to travel and attend many visa interviews in person. And what we plan to do today is to talk a bit about consular processing. And really, our focus will be on the non-immigrant visa applications. We're going to talk about the obvious choice of applying for your visa in your home country. We'll also talk about third country national visa processing at U.S. consular posts in Mexico and Canada. A bit of review about how does one prepare for a visa interview and the visa application in general, and talk a bit about administrative processing, which includes security checks and delays. At the end of the presentation, if we have some time, we'll go through questions, so feel free to type up your questions, and if they're not addressed, we'll try to review those at the end, and I may even take some of those offline as well. So let's start off with a quick review in terms of the difference between what is a U.S. visa and what is status. A very basic concept, but a very important one. So as you can see here, this is a typical U.S. visa. It's on the Lincoln foil. And what a visa is permission from the Department of State, basically allowing you to apply for entry or admission to the U.S. So it's that key document that allows you to board a plane, check in with the airline, or go to the border port of entry to present to a Customs and Border Protection officer who will make a final determination on whether you will be admitted to the U.S. or not. And so what is status? Well, these are you see here a copy of the paper I-94, which is issued by Customs and Border Protection, or CBP. Now, these paper forms are typically now only given out at the land port of entries at the airports. They are just stamping the admission stamp in your passport, and you have to go online to cbp.gov to print out your paper I-94. So who needs a U.S. visa? Well, generally it's going to be anybody that's traveling to the United States as a non-immigrant, so that includes these various visa categories: visitor, investor, trader, students, work visas, aliens of extraordinary ability, etc. There is an exception for Canadian citizens. Canadians, for the most part, do not need a U.S. visa and are visa exempt, except for the K visa and the E visa. Canadians do need visas for those categories. If you have a non-immigrant visa and you enter the U.S. and your visa expires and you depart the United States, well, for the most part, you will probably need a valid visa to be able to re-enter the United States. And there are some exceptions. Automatic revalidation, which we'll go into later in the program. And also, if you travel to U.S. Commonwealths or territories, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, those are states, and generally you don't need to have the valid visa, but you should have status to be able to return. Also, anybody who entered the United States in one status and then changed your status while in the United States. So for instance, you came in as a visitor, you changed status to F1 student, and you depart the United States. Well, to be able to re-enter, you will need a valid student visa to be able to re-enter the United States. So what are your options for applying for a visa? Well, the obvious one is apply back in your home country. The key concepts here are that oftentimes in your home consular post, there may be delays in scheduling to get an appointment, especially during busy travel, peak season, summer, winter holidays. So it's very important to go on to the Department of State website, and there's a link here where you can enter in any U.S. embassy or consulate and see what the current wait times are to get a visa appointment for the different visa categories. You can also see how long, on average, it's taking once the visa is approved for the consular post to actually process and issue the visa into your passport. What you won't see is the time that it takes for the passport to be returned to you, and generally that's done these days via courier. For the most part, applicants between the ages of 14 and 79 will need an in-person interview. There are some pilot programs throughout the world and some of the major busier consular posts for interview waiver program, and you can go online and check each post to see if they participate and who would qualify. So in terms of when is the best time to apply for your visa, well, if you have a valid visa and you're going to have to renew, you might want to consider applying while you still have some time left on your valid visa. In case there's any delays and the consular officer does not cancel your valid visa, that might allow you the opportunity to return back to the United States while the renewal is pending. Now we'll talk about border processing, and what this is a third country national, somebody who's not a citizen of the country, processing, and typically we're talking about consular posts in Canada and Mexico. We'll start off with Mexico. You can look online. I've provided the link here. It has a lot of good information about scheduling appointments in Mexico. There are 10 U.S. consular posts in Mexico, and you have 5 border posts, including the U.S. consulates in Tijuana on the border with San Diego, Nogales, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours south of Tucson, Arizona, the U.S. consulate in Ciudad Juarez on the border with El Paso, Texas, Nuevo Laredo on the border with Laredo, Texas, a couple-hour drive south of San Antonio, and then the consulate in Matamoros, which is on the border with Brownsville, Texas. I've been to all of these 5 consular posts. You also have interior posts in Mexico, which include Hermosillo, Monterrey, Guadalajara, Merida, and then the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City. All of these posts do accept third country nationals, with the couple of caveats, one being they will only process renewals of same category visas only for third country nationals. So if you have already received an H-1B visa and you want to renew your H-1B visa, that's an option for you. But if you entered the U.S. as a student on an F1, graduated with a U.S. degree, get a change of status to H-1, and this is your first H-1, they will not accept your application. Also, they won't do renewals for B visas or the H-2 category. One of the interesting points with Mexico is they have an extra step, which is you have to appear at least a day before at an off-site location called an Applicant Service Center, or ASC, for them to capture your biometrics. So they take your fingerprints, your digital photo. The visa fee covers all these expenses, your biometrics appointment, your U.S. visa interview, biometrics, and the passport courier delivery. Should be noted, for third country nationals, they don't want to see changes of status. So again, you came in on a B2, change status, that's not a renewal. And they do like to see, for third country nationals, cases which are clearly approvable. If you do have some issues, then there's a greater chance that your case could be denied and you could be sent back to your home country to process there, and most likely you won't be able to re-enter the United States if you don't have a valid visa at that point. Most applicants who want to process in Mexico will need a visa for Mexico. There was a relatively new rule that says if you're traveling to Mexico and you have a valid U.S. visa, that's good, along with a valid passport. In Mexico, if all goes well, visas are generally issued within a couple of days. One of the things to consider, which is a big consideration, is travel to Mexico. Is it safe? Over the years, the border regions have become more dangerous. You can go online and review the Department of State travel warnings and summary about country conditions in Mexico. I definitely would advise reviewing that. Keep in mind, if you're going to Mexico, you're going to be there at least a couple of nights. So keep that in mind. Do consult with an immigration attorney to vet your case and possibly to assist you with the visa application. Now we're going to flip to north of the border up to Canada. Similar to Mexico, you can book online. Very similar procedure. In Canada, you have the U.S. consulates in Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, Montreal, Quebec City, Halifax, and finally you have the U.S. Embassy, which is based in Ottawa. Now, unlike Mexico, there is no restriction on visa same category renewals only. So if you are in that situation where you obtained your first visa, such as an F1 student visa, and you graduated with a U.S. degree and are applying for your first-time H-1B, that is generally permitted at posts in Canada. But similar to Mexico, the Canadian posts are restrictive toward applicants who entered the United States initially as a visitor or are here under the visa waiver category and are applying for their first-time visa. Now, in Canada, if you are subject to administrative processing or security clearances, you shouldn't count on being able to re-enter the United States unless you have a valid visa, that which a consular officer has not canceled after undergoing the visa interview. If you have a green card pending, you might have the ability to re-enter the U.S. with a valid advance parole. While in Canada, so if you do undergo a security clearance, you should have a valid Canadian visa and the ability to remain in Canada for that duration. If you have a multiple entry Canadian visa, you might be able to travel abroad while your process is ongoing. If all goes well and the visa is approved, the visa is typically issued within a couple of days after your visa interview. Similar to the United States, with the ESTA visa waiver program, there are 53 nationalities that don't need visas to enter Canada. But starting very soon, visa-exempt nationals traveling to Canada will need an electronic travel authorization, very similar to the U.S. ESTA program. And you can see the links here for the consular posts that handle Canadian visa applications. Now, once you have your Canadian visa, or if you're visa exempt and you're traveling to Canada, oftentimes Canadian immigration will want to see that you have an appointment confirmation at the U.S. consular post in Canada, your key U.S. immigration documents, and typically they want to see you have sufficient funds to cover your temporary stay in Canada. Now, in order to be able to apply outside your home country and apply at one of these border posts or another consular post, the key concept is that you cannot be subject to what's called the Immigration Act Section 222G. And what that means is if you have a date certain I-94 and you've overstayed, well then you must process in your home country. If you've been found to have violated your status, also you're going to be subject to 222G. There are a couple of exceptions for extraordinary circumstances that prevent you from going back to your home country, or if you're a physician working in a medically underserved area on a special waiver. The fact that you're out of status might not prevent you from processing at a border post. Now, while you might not be subject to 222G, if you violated status, especially engaging in unauthorized employment or staying past a duration of your student or exchange visitor limitations, consuls might be more difficult. Also, it might be more difficult to obtain a visa for travel to Mexico or Canada if you're out of status. Did want to touch real briefly on the concept of automatic revalidation. Prior to this change in automatic revalidation, if you were denied a visa in Mexico or Canada and you had a valid I-94 but an expired U.S. visa, you were able to return back to the U.S. Well, post 9/11, there were changes made which basically says if you apply for a new visa and you are denied or are delayed and subjected to a clearance, you are no longer eligible for automatic revalidation. Also, if you're a national of a country that's considered a sponsor of terrorism, this currently is Syria, Iran, and Sudan, you must have a valid visa to return back to the United States. But let's say you travel to the U.S. and you want to take a short trip to Mexico or Canada. Automatic revalidation will still permit you to return back with an expired visa, valid I-94, provided that your stay is less than 30 days. You do not apply for a U.S. visa while you're out, and you don't travel outside of those countries, and you're not from a state sponsor of terrorism country, you still might be eligible for automatic revalidation. Very important to vet this with Immigration Counsel. Oftentimes we prepare letters explaining automatic revalidation for our clients, and how to approach this with Customs and Border Protection, as oftentimes they're not too familiar with automatic revalidation. So what documents are typical for a U.S. visa interview? Now, this is not an all-inclusive list. It's a kind of a summary about what you should at least have available. The most obvious now is the DS-160 barcode confirmation page. If you're a student or exchange visitor visa, all your I-20s and DS-2019s with the most recent one signed for travel. Your passport should be good for at least 6 months. You should bring with you a passport photo in compliance with Department of State requirements. I do encourage everyone to review the Department of State websites and the individual consular post website for the specifics, as every post throughout the world has some different requirements. If you're here in the U.S. with a petition, you want to bring the original approval notice if you can, proof you've paid the visa fee and your appointment notice. For students and J1s, make sure you have your receipt for the SEVIS fee. Students should have their original transcripts, diplomas, and if you are applying for a visa that has a presumption of immigrant intent, even if it's a renewal, you need updated documents showing your ties back to your home country and your finances. Other original documents you need, of course, your passport, approval notice. If ever you've lost a passport, it's key to have your police report and bring those original documents. If you've ever been arrested and or convicted, consular officers want to see the original documents. So arrest report and certified court disposition is a must. And definitely if you have an arrest, even if the charges were dropped, I definitely recommend consulting with the U.S. immigration attorney about potential delays or issues you might experience if you travel. If you're married or have a child, marriage certificate, birth certificate, and translations to English are essential. We talked about degrees and transcripts. You do need to have the originals or certified copies, not just unofficial copies. Now, the actual visa application. So you make your way, you've got your appointment scheduled, you show up at the embassy or consulate. So recommend be a little bit early, give yourself enough time to find the post, get in line, process with security. So be on time or at least a few minutes early. Be polite and friendly to everybody, including the guards, the staff, and most importantly, the consular officer who conducts your interview. It's important to dress nicely for the interview, so professionally as if you're going to a business interview, not show up in jeans and a t-shirt. Consuls will appreciate that you take the interview seriously. You can go on the consular website and see what are the prohibited items, but typically it's going to be any electronic device, something that has a battery, food, makeup, bags, purses, major bags or briefcases, backpacks are generally not permitted, and definitely should come as no surprise, weapons are not allowed into a U.S. consular post. Some posts are being a little bit more tech savvy and allowing in cell phones. I believe the U.S. Embassy London does allow in phones, but most consular posts do not allow electronic devices, cell phones, or laptops inside for the interview process. At the interview, it's important to be honest, answer questions accurately, keep your answers short and simple, be organized. Consuls don't like it when you're fumbling through your documents. They only have a couple of minutes to conduct the interview. They have to do hundreds of interviews every day. So the more organized you are, the better the interview will go. And you should know the details about your case. The visa officer will ask you questions about your visa history and your visa category, and you should be prepared to answer those questions. So if all goes well and you get approved, well, there might still be one extra fee. It's called a reciprocity fee. You can check this link to see if your country of citizenship has any extra fees required for your particular visa category. As mentioned, in Mexico, it takes a couple days after approval for them to issue the visa. Canada is a little bit longer, and other home country consular posts have different delays, so do check the website. Once you get the passport back with your new visa, double check to make sure, A, that it's you, the picture is correct. If the picture is right, make sure all the other information is correct. It's your name, your date of birth, the visa category. Every so often they do make mistakes on visas, and it's important to catch it while you're still abroad before you return back to the United States. When traveling back to the U.S., well, if you're in Mexico or Canada, you have the option of driving. So you would stop at the port of entry and process with Customs and Border Protection. They do charge a $6 fee for issuing the paper I-94. You should have exact change in U.S. currency. If you're flying back from Canada and some other countries, they have what's called pre-flight inspection, where there are U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers stationed at the airports, and you would process there. Otherwise, you would process at the port of entry in the United States. Real briefly, as most know now, there is the DS-160. It's a smart form. It incorporates some of the legacy forms, the DS-156, the 157, and 158, and you provide an electronic signature. You have the link here at state.gov to complete the DS-160 and choose the consular post where you will be applying at. In theory, it's supposed to allow the consular officer in the post to begin processing your application ahead of your visa interview. So if there's some issues, some potential for security checks, it should allow them to start the application prior to you showing up for the interview. Now we're going to talk about some security checks that typically can arise during the course of a visa interview. And in Department of State speak, it's called a Security Advisory Opinion, or SAO for short. And these reflect concerns that the U.S. has about terrorism, counterintelligence, and proliferation of weapons. The first one we'll talk about briefly is the Visa Condor. This was instigated after 9/11. But what we're seeing is that that clearance probably has gone away after the special registration program was terminated about 5 years ago. The criteria is classified, but most likely based on your country of birth and citizenship. The next one is the Visa Mantis. This is still around and active. This is based off of sensitive technologies and whether the visa applicant is involved in the categories found on the critical fields list of Department of State's Technology Alert List, the TAL. Unfortunately, the current version and the fields list and the TAL is not available to the public. If you do a search for Technology Alert List and the critical fields list, you can find the older version. It's got a lot of science fields in there. And so if you're involved in one of these areas, and you're from a certain country, there's a high chance you could be subject to a Visa Mantis clearance. They're looking at dual-use applications, which may be seemingly benign technologies, but have the potential for military applications. The next one is a donkey security clearance. This is a name hit based on non-criminal issues. So, for instance, if you have a very common name for it, you know, what I've seen, your name could be Muhammad Khan, your name could be Maria Ruiz. This is very likely going to result in a donkey security clearance. The problem with this clearance is that these are very long time to resolve, could be weeks, could be months, and sometimes years until they get clearance to go ahead and proceed with issuance of a visa. When you go in for the visa interview, or if you go into the ASC for your biometrics, they are running your fingerprints against the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center database. This contains information on terrorists, foreign warrants, U.S. criminal convictions and arrests. The good thing is they are able to access this database quite quickly, so if there's a hit, you'll know about it very quick. One of the things that we're seeing more often now is applicants having issues because of alcohol use and driving under the influence charges, or if you admit to drug use. So if you have an arrest, a conviction, or admit to drug or alcohol abuse, the consular officer has to refer you to a panel physician in that country for an evaluation. And if they find that you have a problem, you may not be able to get your visa for an additional year. They want to see remission, so they're looking to see that you have at least 12 months during which no substance abuse or associated harmful behavior has occurred. Now, what we're also seeing is if you have a DUI arrest and even other arrests, it's leading to a visa revocation, meaning even if you have a valid visa, once you get that arrest on your record, Department of State's being notified, they alert the local consular post, and they notify applicants that their visas are being revoked and are no longer valid for travel to the United States. This is very common these days. Briefly, we'll talk about PIMS. That stands for the Petition Information Management Service. The Department of State is required to access this database to verify the petition approval. So even though you might have your approval notice, the I-797, the consul must go into the PIMS record to confirm your approval. When it first came out a few years back, it caused quite a bit of delays. The key concept is hopefully your immigration attorney filed the application in duplicate and your petition is in PIMS. If not, you can anticipate delays of days to sometimes weeks until it gets fixed. So let's talk briefly about denials and delays. What happens in the unfortunate instance where you are denied? Well, to try to fix it, and if you're going to be consulting with a competent immigration counsel, the key things you need is the denial letter. So if you're denied a visa, consular officers are mandated to give you a refusal letter, which will tell you why you were denied. It might just be a form letter with different sections of the law, and they tick off a box that probably won't give you too much details. It's good to try to reconstruct the visa interview. Who was the officer? What were the questions they asked you, and what were the answers you provided? We then will look at the denial. Is it a soft denial, meaning you are missing documents, or are they denying you under a presumption of immigrant intent, or that you just don't qualify for the visa category? And then we will analyze it to see if there's the basis to do a request for reconsideration or whether a new visa application is in order. If you're denied, most likely consuls will cancel out any valid visas in your passport. So you would have to disclose if you're trying to come in under visa waiver or ESTA, the visa denial, and most likely you will not be cleared for travel back to the U.S. until you fix your visa issue. If you're subjected to a security check, it is possible to try to expedite, but there are limited circumstances. The consular officer can request expedited processing of a clearance if there is a significant U.S. government or humanitarian concern. Some cases where we've been able to expedite clearances are, for instance, physicians serving in medically underserved areas. The consul understood the circumstances and requested expedited treatment in those types of cases. So who is at risk for travel and delays? Well, you're really looking at immigration issues. Have you had prior immigration or status violations, prior visa denials or delays? Have you had delays with processing a petition or application with the Immigration Service? Have you ever encountered a delay with a port of entry application with Customs and Border Protection, where if they send you to secondary, that's usually a good indicator. Your country of birth, citizenship, nationality, unusual travel patterns. If you're traveling to countries of concern in the Middle East or other countries, you're likely to encounter potential delays or clearances when you apply for a visa. If you've ever been arrested, even if there's no conviction, we talked about that NCIC, technology alert issues for a mantis. If you have a common name, that's the donkey. If you've ever been terminated in SEVIS, an F1 or J1 termination, that's likely to come up when you apply for a later visa and could cause a delay in your application. So what is the role that we play as immigration attorneys in this visa process? Well, one, we help to evaluate your answers and help prepare the DS-160 properly and accurately. We can assist in putting together a legal brief which details your eligibility and all the supporting documents needed for the consular officer at the visa interview. We help to schedule the visa interview and guide you through the process. Preparing for that visa interview, what I typically do with clients is set up a phone call to discuss the strategies, procedures, review the interview questions so you understand what will happen during the course of the visa interview and give you the best chances of getting through that interview. At some posts, attorneys are still allowed to go in person and represent our clients at the visa interview. Many of the posts, unfortunately, in Mexico or Canada do not allow attorneys to go in, but I still do travel quite frequently with clients, and I'm on standby in case there are issues, and the consuls appreciate and understand when I've traveled, and am available to address any concerns or questions that do arise during the course of a visa process. U.S. visa policies, procedures, issues are changing. They fluctuate quite frequently. A consular post might be good one day, and if there are new staffing, can be quite difficult the next. So we usually have up-to-the-date information and provide our clients that information in choosing the best possible location for the visa interview. In the unfortunate circumstance of a visa denial, we'll help evaluate and hope to work on overcoming a visa denial. And also, if you're subjected to a security check or administrative processing delays, try to see if we can help speed that up or look at other options of getting somebody back into the United States if there are urgent circumstances that might come up and might make you eligible for return back to the U.S. If you would like help with U.S. immigration matters, not just the visa process, but in general, our office is a boutique immigration firm. We handle all aspects of U.S. immigration. You're welcome to contact me directly. If you'd like to do an actual online questionnaire, we can evaluate your circumstances and go from there. We do send out immigration newsletters at least once a month, and if you go onto our website at wolfstorff.com, you can sign up to receive our newsletters. We have offices both in Santa Monica, California, which is where I'm based in the LA area. We have an office in New York City as well. And you have our toll-free number and my email. At this point, I'm going to see if we have some questions. I have a couple minutes to review the questions. And you have, again, my contact information here. If you do need assistance with the visa process or with any other U.S. immigration matter, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. Best way is to start off with an email, and we can see if we need to schedule a consultation and review your immigration history. So give me 1 minute as we review your questions. So 1 minute as we pull up your questions. So I think, let's see here, the 30-day automatic revalidation rule, we covered that. So yes, there's still the automatic revalidation, and we talked about the restrictions and requirements, so I think we answered that. There's a question about E2 visas. at the U.S. Consular Post in Toronto. Other consular posts throughout the world do have restrictions on how they want their E2 application submitted. And so yes, you submit to the page limit, and applicants can bring additional documents with them, paper documents with them for the consular officer's review. Sometimes consuls will also ask for additional documents prior to the interview. Somebody asked, is a legal brief for the consular officer really useful for a client considering the interview is about 2 minutes? I say definitely, because consuls do appreciate when an attorney has prepared a succinct cover letter. It should be realized, though, that consular officers interview the client. They don't interview documents. And one of the common things I do hear from applicants is that, well, they didn't look at any of my paperwork. Consuls are trained in doing interviews. The documents are secondary, but when there are issues or concerns, consuls do appreciate a succinct summary about the application. Somebody asked about overcoming FOIA requests with Department of State. Department of State does not provide much documentation when you do a FOIA request. It's not really covered in this presentation, but you will really only get back documents that the applicant provided to the consul. You won't get any of their internal notes. I think that concludes the questions. I wanted to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. I do encourage, if you have additional questions, to feel free to email me directly. And we do look forward, if you do seek U.S. immigration assistance in helping you out with your visa application, visa petitions, and additional questions. We are not sending out the presentation. You will be able to view it on our website. You will be able to view our webinar as well. It was recorded, and you'll be able to review the slides online at your leisure. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope you can attend one of our future webinars. Thank you.